My name is Charles Whitman. I'm 67 years old, a retired machinist, and I've lived in the same small Pennsylvania town my entire life. Most evenings are quiet, predictable, and even comforting. But one night, over something as ordinary as dinner at my son's house, everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and safety began to unravel. We were sitting at the dining room table, my son Daniel, and his wife Melissa. The roast smelled rich, the wine sparkled in our glasses, and for a moment, I almost let myself believe things were finally improving between us. Then my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Howard Miller, a man I'd trusted for decades. His voice trembled the moment I picked up. "Charles, are you home right now?" "No," I replied, glancing at Daniel, who was busy pouring another glass of wine. "I'm having dinner at my son's place." Howard's next words froze me in place, fork suspended halfway to my mouth. "Then who is inside your house right now?" he whispered. In that instant, the warmth of the meal vanished. My heart pounded, and fear settled deep into my bones. That single question would change everything. When I finally managed to set the phone down, my hands were still shaking. I forced a smile for Daniel and Melissa, though I doubt either of them believed it. My neighbor's voice still echoed in my ears, that awful whisper, "Who is inside your house right now?" To understand the weight of those words, you need to know something about my life and the family I raised. I spent 45 years working in a machine shop, first as an apprentice, then as a foreman, and eventually as a man everyone came to when they needed a tough problem solved. I built my life on sweat, precision, and the belief that if you worked hard enough, you could provide your family with a better future. That's why I sold our family farm last year. 3 generations of Whitmans had bled into that soil, but it was time. The sale gave me enough to retire with dignity, to live out my years without being a burden on anyone. Daniel, my only son, never quite inherited that same drive. He was smart, no doubt about it, but his smarts were always looking for shortcuts. When he was young, it was small thing schemes to sell baseball cards at inflated prices, or elaborate excuses for why his homework wasn't finished. Later, as an adult, those shortcuts grew sharper edges. Failed businesses. Questionable investments. And, finally, gambling. I had bailed him out more times than I can count. The worst was 5 years ago, when he showed up at my doorstep in the middle of the night, sweating and pale, claiming he owed $15,000 to friends who weren't the type you could just ignore. Against my better judgment, I pulled money from my savings and handed it over, praying it would be the last time. He promised me he'd learned his lesson. He swore he was done with cards, dice, and slot machines. But promises, I learned, are only as strong as the man making them. Melissa, his wife, tried to hold the line where I could not. She worked steady hours as a nurse, kept their modest home running, and reminded Daniel constantly of the life they were building together. I liked her from the beginning. She had grit and kindness, 2 things my son sorely lacked in equal measure. More than once, she called me in tears, trying to patch things up when Daniel's bad decisions left cracks in their marriage. That night at their dinner table, though, something felt different. Too polished, too rehearsed. Melissa's hands shook when she set down the serving dish, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. Daniel, on the other hand, was animated, his grin too wide, his voice pitched just a little too high, like a man trying desperately to sell me on something. And maybe that's exactly what he was doing. I looked around the dining room, noticing details that didn't quite fit. New china plates with golden rims. Silverware polished to a shine. Candles glowing from 3 different holders. It all looked like a set prepared for company far more important than an old man in a suit that had seen better days. The unease in my gut grew stronger with every passing minute. "You all right, Dad?" Daniel asked, his fork stabbing into his steak with unnecessary force. "Fine," I muttered, though the word tasted like a lie. My mind was already drifting back to my neighbor's voice. Howard was no fool. He was a retired army man, steady as they come. He didn't spook easy, and he sure as hell didn't call me unless something was wrong. Melissa tried to cut the tension. "It's good to have you here, Mr. Whitman. We've missed family dinners." Her words should have warmed me, but they landed flat. She was performing, too. I could see it in the way her eyes darted to Daniel, waiting for his approval. I pressed my napkin against my lap, took a breath, and told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe Howard really had seen shadows. Maybe it was kids messing around, or some trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. Howard didn't whisper in fear for nothing. And Daniel's son kept glancing at his watch. I folded my arms and leaned back, studying him the way I used to when he was a boy trying to lie his way out of breaking a window. His tells hadn't changed. The restless shifting in his chair, the forced laugh, the refusal to meet my eyes directly. The realization made my chest ache. "Dad," he said suddenly, as if trying to cut off my train of thought. "I just want tonight to be special. Can't we just enjoy this meal? Put the past behind us?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. "That's exactly what I want, son. The past behind us." But even as the words left my lips, I couldn't shake the feeling that the past had just walked right through my front door, and was tearing apart the life I had tried so hard to protect. Melissa leaned forward and offered me the mashed potatoes with a polite smile, but her hand trembled just enough for a few spoonfuls to spill onto the tablecloth. She quickly dabbed at the stain with her napkin, murmuring an apology. I waved it off, though my eyes lingered on her longer than I meant to. It wasn't clumsiness. It was nerves. Daniel, on the other hand, was all charm. He launched into a story about his childhood baseball days, laughing loudly as he reminded me of the time he struck out 3 times in one game and cried all the way home. Melissa chuckled along, but the laugh was forced, and her eyes never left her plate. The dining room itself felt more like a showroom than a home. Every surface gleamed. Fresh flowers, roses, no less, sat in a vase at the center of the table. A bottle of expensive wine I'd never seen before had been opened with theatrical flair. Even the chairs had been polished until they shone under the dim candlelight. For a moment, I wondered how Daniel, who never cared for appearances, had managed to put all this together. The answer came to me slowly, like a storm cloud forming on the horizon. He wanted me distracted. Still, I played along. I forced myself to cut into the roast beef Melissa had worked so hard on, though the bite sat heavy in my throat. The taste was fine, but the mood soured everything. "So, Dad," Daniel said, pouring more wine into my glass though I hadn't asked for it. "What's retirement like? You keeping busy?" "Yard work, reading, a little fishing," I answered, keeping my voice even. "It's quiet. Peaceful." He nodded as if that satisfied him, but then his tone shifted just slightly. "You must have a nice cushion from the farm sale." "That's good. Makes life easier when you don't have to worry about money." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. His words were casual on the surface, but beneath them I heard the real message. He was still thinking about that money. Melissa jumped in quickly, almost too quickly. "Charles, did you try the green beans? They're from the farmer's market. Daniel insisted we buy the best ones." Her attempt at deflection only deepened my unease. Why was she covering for him? Why was she trying so hard to steer the conversation away from finances? I glanced at Daniel's wristwatch. He'd checked it twice already. Each time, his smile grew tighter. He tried to hide it, but I knew that look. He was waiting on something. Trying to break the silence, I set down my fork and asked Melissa about her work. Nurses always had stories, some heartbreaking, some heartwarming. She usually lit up when talking about the patients she cared for. But tonight, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, like someone worried about saying too much. "It's been busy," she finally said, folding her napkin with deliberate precision. "Lots of long shifts. But it's rewarding." Her eyes darted toward Daniel again. That tiny glance said more than words ever could. She was afraid of him. I wanted to push further, to ask outright what was going on, but I stopped myself. For now, I needed to watch, to listen. To gather the truth quietly, the way I used to troubleshoot a broken machine, observe the symptoms, test the responses, wait for the flaw to reveal itself. "Dad," Daniel said again, breaking into my thoughts. "We're really glad you came tonight. It means a lot." He reached across the table and patted my hand. His grip was too firm, the gesture too rehearsed. "I'm glad too," I lied, even as my stomach twisted. The truth was, nothing about this dinner felt genuine. The food, the smiles, the conversation, it was all performance. And if I had learned anything in 67 years, it was this: when people put on a show, it's because they want to hide the real story. I excused myself for a moment and walked to the living room under the pretense of admiring their new house. From the corner of my eye, I caught Melissa whispering urgently to Daniel. He shook his head, his jaw clenched. When I returned to the table, both of them wore identical masks of cheerfulness, too bright, too polished. And that's when the thought hit me hard: this wasn't dinner. It was a distraction. I had barely settled back into my chair when my phone lit up again, buzzing against the table like a rattlesnake. I glanced at the screen. Howard Miller. My neighbor. "Excuse me," I muttered, reaching for it. Daniel's hand shot out, almost too fast, covering mine before I could grab the phone. "Dad, don't worry about that," he said with a chuckle that rang false. "It can wait. Tonight's about us." But I pulled my hand free and answered. "Howard? Everything okay?" His voice trembled on the other end. "Charles, I didn't want to alarm you earlier, but I've been watching your house. There are lights moving inside, flashlight beams. They've been going from room to room for the last 10 minutes. My stomach dropped. I tightened my grip on the phone. "You're certain?" "Dead certain," he whispered. "First the living room, then the kitchen. Now they're upstairs. Whoever it is, they're not stumbling around theory searching. Methodical." Melissa's fork clattered against her plate. Daniel froze, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. "I'm calling the police," Howard continued. "But I thought you should know." "Yes, call them," I said quickly. "I'll head home right now." The moment I stood, chair scraping against the hardwood, Daniel blocked my way. He rose so abruptly his wine sloshed over the rim of his glass. "Dad, come on." Howard, seeing things. You know how jumpy he can be. His laugh was too loud, too sharp. Tree shadows, headlights, anything could look like a flashlight to him. But Howard wasn't the type to confuse shadows for intruders. I knew it. And Daniel knew I knew it. "Move aside, Daniel." My voice was steady, but my heart hammered against my ribs. He raised both hands, palms out as if to calm me, but he didn't step away from the doorway. "Let's be rational. If someone really was breaking into your house, why would they pick a time when everyone's home for dinner? Burglars aren't stupid. They plan these things. They case the place. They don't just waltz in while the neighbors are watching." I froze. The way he said it, specific, detailed, almost offensive, made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. How would he know what burglars usually do? Melissa's face had gone pale. She was gripping the stem of her wineglass so tightly I thought it might snap. When our eyes met, she looked away immediately, guilt flashing across her features like lightning before a storm. "Daniel," I said slowly, carefully choosing my words. "How do you know they didn't case the place? How do you know exactly what they're doing in there?" He flinched. Just for a second. But I caught it. That crack in the mask. "I don't," he stammered. "I just am saying it doesn't make sense, that's all." "Dad, please. Sit back down. Finish dinner. We'll go together afterward if it makes you feel better. I stepped closer, close enough to see beads of sweat gathering on his forehead despite the cool evening air seeping through the open window. No. I'm going now. Move aside. His hand shot out and pressed against my chest, firm and unyielding. Not a son's gentle touch, but a barrier. A restraint. Melissa gasped softly, her napkin falling to the floor. Daniel, stop. He ignored her, locking eyes with me. For the first time, I saw it cold calculation behind the forced smile. This wasn't about concern. This was about control. Dad, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, low and dangerous. You're not leaving. Not until we talk this through. The word struck harder than any physical blow. He had just confirmed what I feared, the dinner was never about reconciliation. It was about keeping me here away from my own house while something else unfolded. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and felt a grief deeper than anything I had ever known. This wasn't the boy I raised, the one who used to fall asleep beside me in the truck after long fishing trips. This was a man I hardly recognized, a man who had chosen deceit over blood. Melissa whispered again, her voice trembling, Charles, maybe you should go. Her words broke the spell. I straightened my shoulders, meeting Daniel's glare head-on. Get out of my way, son. He didn't move. His hand pressed harder against my chest. The silence in the room thickened until I thought I might choke on it. In that moment, one truth became painfully clear, whatever was happening inside my house, Daniel knew about it. Maybe he'd planned it. Maybe he was stalling me until it was done. Either way, the son I thought I knew was gone. Daniel's hand stayed on my chest, firm and unyielding, his knuckles white with tension. I could feel the heat of his palm through my shirt. For a moment, neither of us moved. It was as though the room itself had stopped breathing, waiting to see who would give in first. Melissa finally broke the silence. Daniel, please, she whispered, her voice raw with fear. This isn't right. He shot her a glare so sharp it silenced her instantly. Stay out of this, Melissa. That was when I knew she wasn't his accomplice, at least not willingly. She looked trapped, her shoulders tight, her eyes darting between us like a cornered animal searching for an exit. Son, I said evenly, forcing calm into my voice, whatever is happening right now, you need to step aside. If you don't, I'm going to start asking questions you won't want to answer. His lips curled into something halfway between a sneer and a nervous smile. Questions? About what? You think I'd hurt you, Dad? I invited you here. We're having dinner, for God's sake. I shook my head slowly. No, Daniel. We're not having dinner. We're performing a play. And you've been checking your watch every 10 minutes like an actor waiting for his cue. His mask cracked then, just a flicker, but enough for me to see the truth. Melissa covered her mouth with both hands, her breathing shallow. Daniel, tell him, she begged. Just tell him before this gets worse. He slammed his hand down on the table, the silverware rattling against the china. There's nothing to tell, he barked, though the wild look in his eyes betrayed him. I remembered his words from a week earlier, when I'd refused to hand him $25,000, you'll regret this, old man. Now, staring at him in the candlelight, I realized he wasn't bluffing. He'd meant every syllable. I tried another angle, softer this time. Daniel, look at me. I'm still your father. Whatever hole you've dug yourself into, we can find another way. But locking me in your house while someone ransacks mine? That's a line you can't uncross. For a moment, his jaw trembled, and I almost believed he'd surrender to that appeal. But then his expression hardened again, colder than I'd ever seen it. You don't understand, Dad. You never understood. There are people I owe money to, people who don't forgive debts. This isn't about me anymore. It's about survival. There it was. The confession I dreaded. Melissa sobbed quietly into her napkin. You dragged your own father into this. Daniel, what have you done? He rounded on her, voice rising. What choice did I have? He wouldn't help me. I asked him, begged him, and he turned his back on me. Because you've asked 100 times before, I shot back, my patience finally breaking. Every dollar I gave you disappeared into a slot machine or a poker table. Enough is enough. You're a grown man, nearly 40 years old, and you're still living like a reckless teenager. That's why I said no. His face flushed crimson, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. Instead, he grabbed my jacket from the chair and tossed it behind him, out of reach. You're not going anywhere. Not until it's done. The words chilled me. Until it's done. He just admitted the truth. This whole dinner was nothing more than a distraction, a stage set to keep me occupied while someone else did his dirty work. I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. If you go through with this, Daniel, you won't just lose money. You'll lose me. You'll lose every shred of respect left in this world. Do you understand? His eyes flickered again, but the resolve in them was stubborn, desperate. He was cornered by debts I couldn't see, by men whose shadows reached farther than my warnings ever could. Melissa suddenly rose from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I can't watch this, she said, her voice breaking. She rushed to the kitchen, and for a brief second, I considered following her, using the distraction to make my escape. But Daniel stayed rooted to the door, his bulk blocking the only exit. You think I wanted this? He hissed, leaning closer. You think I enjoy tricking my own father? This is survival. And if you'd just given me the money, none of this would have been necessary. I met his gaze without flinching. No, Daniel. If I'd given you the money, it would have only delayed this moment. Because men like you, men who never learn, always come back for more. His breathing grew ragged, uneven. He was unraveling, and he knew it. I took another step forward, close enough to smell the wine on his breath. Unlock the door, son. Give me the keys. Prove there's still a piece of the boy I raised inside you. He laughed then, but it wasn't the laugh of a son. It was the hollow, humorless sound of a man who had already crossed a line he couldn't retreat from. That boy's gone, Dad. You buried him the day you sold the farm. The words sliced deeper than any knife could. I straightened, steeling myself. If Daniel wasn't going to let me out, then I would have to find another way. And in the back of my mind, a single thought echoed louder than my son's lies: Howard was right. Someone is inside my house. And every second I remain here, I lose more than just possessions, I lose my future. The moment Daniel uttered those words, that boy's gone, Dad, something inside me hardened. I had spent decades hoping, praying, forgiving. But now I saw my son clearly for who he had become, a desperate man willing to sacrifice his own father to cover his mistakes. I straightened in my chair, my voice steady. Unlock the door, Daniel. Give me the keys. He smirked, slipping his hand into his pocket. The metallic click of the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot through the quiet dining room. He pulled his hand back out slowly, dangling the key just long enough for me to see it before tucking it away again. You're not leaving, Dad. Not until this is over. Melissa returned from the kitchen, her face pale and streaked with tears. She froze when she saw Daniel standing in front of the door, his chest heaving. Daniel, she said softly, please. This isn't who you are. Isn't it? He snapped, not looking at her. This is exactly who I am now. And you'll both just have to accept it. I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting the urge to shove past him. At 67, I wasn't the man I once was, but I still had some fight left in me. My years in the shop had given me arms strong enough to lift engines and shoulders broad enough to hold up half a roof. Daniel had size on his side, but I had something he lacked: resolve born from principle. Son, I said evenly, you've already crossed too many lines tonight. Don't add holding your own father hostage to the list. He laughed bitterly. Hostage? You think I want this? I didn't have a choice. If I don't pay them back, they'll come after me and after Melissa too. Do you get that, Dad? This isn't just about me anymore. Melissa gasped. You dragged me into this? Into your debts. Her voice shook with fury and fear. Daniel turned on her, eyes wild. What did you expect me to do? They gave me a deadline. I had to find a way. Dad's sitting on money he doesn't even need. That money, I interrupted sharply, is my retirement. It's the roof over my head, the food on my table, the medicine that keeps me alive. It isn't a slush fund for your gambling addiction. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. You don't understand, he said again, lower this time, almost pleading. I understand more than you think, I replied, my voice dropping to match his. I understand you've been lying to me. I understand you set up this dinner as a distraction. And I understand that while you sit here pretending to be a dutiful son, someone else is tearing apart my house. The truth landed like a hammer. Melissa staggered back, covering her mouth. Daniel, is it true? He didn't answer. His silence was more damning than any confession. The anger I'd been holding back surged through me. I stepped forward until we were inches apart, my voice like steel. Move aside. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. His fists curled, his chest rose and fell in quick bursts. Instead, he shoved me hard against the wall, his face inches from mine. You'll regret this, old man, he hissed, echoing the threat he'd made a week earlier. The air left my lungs in a rush, but I refused to back down. No, Daniel. The only regret here is mine for believing there was still a shred of honesty left in you. Melissa cried out, stop it. Both of you. She grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him back. For an instant, his grip loosened. I seized the moment. I need the bathroom, I said suddenly, forcing my voice into something closer to calm. Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the change in tone. What? I'm an old man, I said, shrugging. You want me to sit here all night, I'll need the bathroom eventually. Unless you plan on locking me in there too. He hesitated. That small fragment of decency left in him, the part raised by the boy I once knew, wouldn't deny me that. Finally, he stepped aside, his voice tight. Fine. But don't try anything stupid. Melissa's eyes met mine, wide and desperate. She knew. She hoped. I walked slowly toward the hallway, every step deliberate, hiding the storm inside me. The bathroom door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time all night, I was out of Daniel's line of sight. My hands trembled as I reached for the small window above the toilet. Old, paint-chipped, but functional. The latch creaked, and I froze, straining to hear if Daniel had noticed. Voices murmured in the dining room, his harsh and frantic, Melissa's low and pleading. I pushed the window open with care, the night air rushing in cool against my face. Below was a 6-foot drop into Melissa's flower bed. Not ideal for a man my age, but better than being locked in here while my house was stripped bare. I gritted my teeth, swung one leg through, then the other. My jacket snagged on the sill, ripping the fabric, but I didn't care. I landed hard in the dirt, my knees protesting, but I stayed quiet. Behind me, Daniel's voice rose in panic. Where is he? I didn't wait to hear Melissa's answer. I scrambled toward my car, keys tight in my fist, heart pounding like a drum. Daniel had trapped me, lied to me, betrayed me. But he had underestimated one thing: his father still knew how to fight his way out of a corner. And tonight, I wasn't going to let him win. The car door shut with a heavy thud that seemed louder than thunder in the quiet neighborhood. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the keys, but muscle memory kicked in, and the engine roared to life. For a moment, I expected Daniel to come charging out of the house, maybe even throw himself in front of the car to stop me. But the street stayed still, the curtains in his windows twitching as if Melissa were watching from inside. I eased onto the road, headlights sweeping across the manicured lawns. My heart pounded so fiercely I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to floor it, to speed home, but I forced myself to stay calm. A panicked driver drew attention, and the last thing I needed was to wreck the car before I even made it back to my street. The drive was only 10 minutes, but it stretched into eternity. My mind replayed the evening in fragments, Daniel's forced laughter, Melissa's trembling hands, the too-perfect dinner table, the metallic click of the deadbolt. It was all a carefully scripted act to keep me away while someone else gutted my house. Howard's warning replayed in my head, sharper each time, lights moving around inside. Systematic. Methodical. When I turned onto my street, the sight that greeted me both relieved and terrified me. Flashing red and blue lights painted the houses, their reflections dancing across windows and mailboxes. Patrol cars lined the curb in front of my home, neighbors gathered in hushed clusters behind yellow tape. I parked quickly, my tires crunching against the gravel. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled toward the officers. One of them, a tall man with a square jaw and steady eyes, met me halfway. His name tag read Miller, no relation to Howard, but I recognized him as Officer Ted Miller, a man I'd seen around town over the years. "Mr. Whitman?" he asked. I nodded, out of breath though I'd only walked a few steps. "That's me. What's happening? Did you catch him?" His expression was calm, professional, but edged with sympathy. "We have a suspect in custody. He was apprehended in your basement, attempting to access what appears to be a safe." Relief and fury clashed in my chest. "A safe," I muttered. Of course. My father had installed that safe 40 years ago, back when people trusted steel more than banks. I'd kept my retirement savings there, tucked away where I thought no one would ever dare touch it. Officer Miller gestured toward a patrol car parked by the curb. I followed him, my stomach twisting. Through the window, I saw a man slumped in the back seat, handcuffed, his pale face illuminated by the glow of the cruiser's interior light. Recognition hit me like a hammer. It was the stranger from earlier in the week, the one who'd sat in the old truck across from Mrs. Henderson's mailbox. He'd claimed his engine was overheated, fumbling with excuses while his eyes kept flicking toward my property. "His name's Raymond Cole," Miller explained. 43 years old, multiple priors for burglary and fraud. He says he was hired to do this job. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "Hired by who?" The officer's gaze met mine squarely. "He claims your son arranged the burglary. Says Daniel promised him $5,000 to break into your safe and deliver the cash." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Hearing the truth spoken aloud by a man in uniform made it undeniable. I had suspected, feared, even known deep down, but now the words were carved into stone. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me. He had orchestrated a crime against me. "Did he get into the safe?" I asked finally, my voice rough. Miller shook his head. "No. He made it to the basement and attempted to force it open. You'll see tool marks where he tried a crowbar and drill. But the safe held. By the time our units surrounded the house, he was cornered. He surrendered without a fight once he heard the sirens." A bitter laugh escaped me. So my father's old Mosler safe stood stronger than my own son's loyalty. The officer didn't reply. Instead, he guided me toward the porch, where another officer catalogued evidence. A crowbar lay discarded beside the safe door, screwdrivers scattered across the concrete floor. It was the picture of desperation, not expertise. Howard approached from the sidewalk, his arms crossed. "I told you something wasn't right with that truck," he said, his voice steady but his eyes soft with concern. "Saw him watching your place like a hawk. Glad I trusted my gut. I clasped his shoulder, my throat tight. You saved everything, Howard. If you hadn't called, I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of losing the money, the memories, the sense of safety, it was too much. He squeezed my arm firmly. Any neighbor would have done the same. Don't thank me yet, though. You've got bigger battles ahead. He was right. The burglary was only half the wound. The deeper cut was knowing Daniel had engineered it. Officer Miller returned, his clipboard tucked under his arm. Mr. Whitman, I need to ask. Do you want to press charges if we gather sufficient evidence against your son? The question hit harder than any punch. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to change the oil in his first car, to hold his head high, was now a man conspiring against his own father. Could I really send him to prison? But then I remembered his smirk as he locked the door. The sweat on his forehead as he stalled me. The way Melissa's hands shook when she tried to cover for him. Yes, I could. Yes, I said firmly, my voice low but resolute. If the evidence proves it, I want full charges pressed against Daniel Whitman. Howard exhaled beside me, the weight of the moment heavy on both of us. I turned back toward my house, its windows still glowing with police flashlights. For 40 years, I had trusted that safe to guard my future. Tonight, it had. But the true loss wasn't measured in money. It was measured in blood. My only son had chosen greed over family. And that was a debt no one could ever repay. The ride to Daniel's house felt like a funeral procession. I followed behind the convoy of police cruisers, their red and blue lights painting the quiet streets of Riverside in garish colors. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, but I couldn't loosen them. Each flash of light seemed to drive the same thought deeper into my skull: my own son had betrayed me. By the time we turned onto Maple Street, my heart felt like stone. Daniel's house glowed like a lighthouse in the dark, every window illuminated, the front porch light blazing as though he thought he could ward off what was coming with sheer brightness. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, watching. Through the wide picture window, I could see movement: Daniel pacing the living room, running his hands through his hair. Melissa flitted from room to room, and I caught the glint of a suitcase in her hand. She wasn't packing for a trip, she was trying to gather her life before it collapsed completely. The cruisers fanned out, officers stepping from their cars with methodical calm, forming a perimeter. Officer Ted Miller walked up the front path, his flashlight beam steady in the night air. I climbed out of my car, standing near the curb, close enough to witness but far enough not to interfere. The door opened before Officer Miller could knock. Melissa stood there, pale as a ghost, her eyes rimmed red from crying. Her voice trembled as she said, "He's here. He knows you're coming. He's been expecting you." Behind her, Daniel appeared. He looked nothing like the confident man who had locked me inside his home just hours earlier. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his face drawn tight with desperation. His hands shook as he raised them halfway in surrender, though his mouth still spewed defiance. "This is ridiculous," he shouted as officers stepped inside. "You're destroying a family over some old man's paranoia. My father doesn't know what he's talking about." I flinched at the word paranoia, but the bitterness in his voice confirmed everything I already knew. Officer Miller's tone was steady, unflinching. "Daniel Whitman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit burglary, solicitation of criminal activity, and conspiracy to commit theft." The cuffs clicked around his wrists with a finality that made my stomach churn. Daniel twisted toward Melissa, his voice rising. "Tell them, Melissa. Tell them I was with you all night. Tell them this is crazy." Melissa's shoulders straightened, and for the first time all evening, she looked him in the eye without flinching. Her voice was quiet, but strong enough for every officer and me to hear. "I know you locked your father in our house. I know you hired someone to rob him while you stalled him here. I know you planned this whole thing because of your debts." The words cut through the night air like a bell tolling. Daniel's face went from red to white, his jaw working uselessly as though he could chew up her confession and swallow it back down. "You don't understand," he screamed, struggling against the officers. "You don't know the people I owe. They'll kill me if I don't pay them back." Melissa's reply was sharp, final. "Then you should have thought of that before you tried to steal from your own father. Before you turned our marriage into part of your schemes." Her words silenced him more effectively than any set of handcuffs could. The officers guided him down the porch steps, his voice breaking into frantic pleas. "Dad! Tell them this isn't true. Dad, don't let them do this." I stood rooted to the ground, my chest aching as I watched my son, my only child, being led away like a criminal. A part of me wanted to rush forward, to throw myself between him and the patrol car, to shield him like I had when he was a boy. But another part, the part that had listened to Howard's trembling voice and seen the crowbar marks on my safe, knew better. I couldn't save him. Not from the law, and not from himself. The officers placed him in the back of the cruiser, his face pressed against the glass. His mouth still moved, words spilling in a desperate flood, but I couldn't hear him. The door slammed shut, muffling his protests into nothing more than a muffled blur. Melissa stepped out onto the porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked like someone who had just lost a limb, staggered, hollow, but oddly relieved. For the first time, she wasn't trying to cover for him. She had chosen truth over loyalty, and in doing so, she had chosen freedom for herself. Officer Miller walked over to me, his expression sober. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow, Mr. Whitman. Between the suspect's confession and your daughter-in-law's corroboration, the case is solid." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I watched as the convoy pulled away, Daniel's silhouette shrinking into the night. 38 years of fatherhood, and it had come to this: my son locked in the back of a police car, his future reduced to a stack of charges and a courtroom battle. Melissa finally approached me, her voice breaking. "Charles, I'm sorry. I knew something was wrong tonight, but I didn't know how to stop it. I should have said something sooner." I shook my head. "You did what you could. In the end, you told the truth. That matters." Her tears spilled freely now, her shoulders shaking. "I can't stay married to him after this. I can't live in lies anymore." There was nothing I could say to soften her pain. We stood there in silence as the last patrol car disappeared down the street, the neighborhood returning to its uneasy quiet. When I finally got back into my own car, the seat felt colder than it had before. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty house across the street, wondering how my life had come to this point. My son hadn't just broken the law, had broken me. And now, there was no going back. 2 days later, I sat on my front porch with Howard Miller, sharing a quiet beer. The chaos of flashing lights, police tape, and reporters had faded, leaving our street looking normal again. But nothing about my life felt normal. Not after watching my son taken away in handcuffs. The court moved faster than I expected. Daniel's charges were serious, but the judge weighed his lack of violent history and Melissa's testimony carefully. In the end, Daniel was sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to pay restitution for the damages, and assigned 500 hours of community service. It wasn't prison, but it was punishment. The judge made it clear, the family nature of the crime was an aggravating factor, not a reason for mercy. Raymond Cole, the burglar caught in my basement, wasn't as lucky. With prior convictions, he drew 2 years in county jail. I almost pitied him, but then I remembered the crowbar marks on my father's safe and the image of him crouched in the shadows of my home. Pity faded quickly. Melissa filed for divorce the day after Daniel's arrest. She came to see me once, her eyes red from crying but her voice steady. "I can't be married to a man who would betray his own father," she said. "He's crossed too many lines. I need to start over." I told her she had my blessing. Truth be told, I felt sorry for her. She had carried Daniel longer than she should have, shielding him from consequences I should have forced on him years ago. She deserved peace, and I hoped she'd find it. As for me, I spent the following week repairing what Daniel had broken, not just the locks on my doors or the scratches on the safe, but the fragile trust one had in the world around me. I upgraded my home security system, added motion sensors, and replaced the old locks with reinforced ones. Not out of fear, but out of a clear understanding: once trust is shattered, caution becomes a necessity. Sitting with Howard that Friday afternoon, I finally found the words I hadn't been able to speak since the arrest. "You saved me," I told him. "Not just my money, but my peace of mind. If you hadn't made that call, I would have lost everything." Howard waved it off, though pride flickered in his eyes. "That's what neighbors are for. You'd have done the same for me." "Maybe," I said, "but I don't know if I would have noticed the way you did. You've still got those army instincts." He chuckled. "Sometimes being suspicious pays off. That truck just didn't sit right with me." We lapsed into silence, the comfortable kind that exists only between people who've gone through something significant together. Around us, the neighborhood carried on as usual: kids pedaling their bikes, Mrs. Henderson tending her roses, the distant sound of a lawnmower humming down the street. Life was resuming its rhythm. But for me, nothing would ever be the same. I kept thinking back to that Wednesday night. Sitting at Daniel's dining table, watching him and Melissa put on their act. The perfectly set table, the over-rehearsed memories, the forced cheer. All of it was theater. And the terrible part was, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe my son had changed. "Parental instincts," Howard said when I voiced that thought aloud. "You raised that boy. You knew something was off. But you wanted it to be real so badly that you ignored what your gut was screaming." He was right. I had ignored the signs because the alternative was too painful. Admitting my son was capable of betraying me meant admitting I had failed as a father. But failure or not, reality had proven itself. The sunset painted our street in gold as Howard leaned back in his chair. "What'll you do now?" he asked. I took a long sip of my beer, letting the fizz settle on my tongue before answering. "I'll live. I'll keep my eyes open. I'll stop hoping for a son I no longer have, and start being grateful for the neighbors and friends I do." He nodded approvingly. "That's all any of us can do." That night, after Howard went home, I sat alone on my porch and thought about the word hope. It wasn't gone. It never would be. But it had changed. Hope was no longer blind, no longer naive. Hope had grown sharper, cautious, and wiser. I still prayed Daniel would find his way through probation, counseling, and restitution. Maybe he would confront the demons of his gambling addiction. Maybe he'd rebuild a life that wasn't built on lies. But whether he did or not, I knew one thing: I couldn't carry his burden anymore. The boy I had raised was gone. The man who replaced him had chosen a darker path. All I could do was step out of the shadows he cast and walk in the light of truth, with eyes open and heart guarded. And as the cicadas hummed in the trees and the stars began to pierce the night sky, I whispered the words I should have accepted long ago. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes survival means closing the door. And sometimes the greatest act of hope is learning to hope no more.